Tucker Carlson's team has been combing through 40,000 hours of footage from the Capitol, and to the surprise of nobody who have been paying attention, the insurrection looks like a supersized nothing burger. Furthermore, we now have proof that J6 committee members lied to the public. Below are just a few key revelations. So, the first one we see here footage shows that the QAnon shaman was escorted by police throughout the US Capitol during the January 6th riot. The QAnon shaman's real name is Jacob Chansley, who in September 2021 pleaded guilty to one count of obstructing an official proceeding and was sentenced to 41 months in prison that November, according to the New York Post. So, the second thing that came out of the footage, Carlson released footage of Brian Sicknick, Officer Brian Sicknick, walking around the Capitol healthy after the media claimed he had been killed by Trump supporters. Then the third thing here, remember the infamous video of Josh Hawley running away from the chaos on January 6th? Well, never before seen J6 footage shows that he was in fact one of many lawmakers running away from the chaos in that moment and was actually at the back of the pack. So all those videos can be found. I'll link them in the show notes after the stream. But John, what was your initial reaction to that crazy story?
Well, first reaction is I'm not surprised because we've been saying this for a long time, and anything can get manipulated nowadays. And the probably the worst part was they're comparing this. When I say they, I'm saying the leftist politicians like Ilhan Omar, the current administration. We're trying to say this is almost like a 9/11 attack, almost even worse. And I can't think of anything more disrespectful to the people that lost their lives and the families that are still feeling the effects of 9/11. Like, people can get into the other aspects of 9/11 was planned or something like that. Like, forget all that. That was a time where we really came together, something that Graham Allen, who I do a lot of work with at Turning Point USA, talks so much about September 12th, how we
Yeah.
really came together that day. And that was based off a legitimate tragedy, a legitimate attack on our nation. This was not a legitimate attack on our democracy, on our republic, nothing like that. And it's so funny to me that you have so many people on the left, whether they're in media or they have some sort of platform, they're trying to double down and triple down and discredit Tucker Carlson, who has an incredible team. And David Hogg, I think people know who David Hogg is. He was like, there's no way he could go through 40 hours of footage in just about a week. And it's like, all right, this is when you probably should have gone to college, got a little bit more education to understand how he can have a large team that can divvy up all of this 40 hours and find
Yeah.
out the truth. And then we see too the videos that you're probably going to link in the show notes goes to show how manipulative the January 6th committee's been. And no matter if you're on the right or the left, taxpayer dollars were used for this absolute sham of a committee. So anytime we see someone talk about January 6th, show them what Tucker Carlson's team, and thanks Fox News for allowing him to put this story together, because media, no matter what, is going to have some sort of spin to it. And there's definitely times where being silent about things can be advantageous for that base, because there's plenty of times that Fox News did not care for Donald Trump whatsoever. But at this point, it's all about truth. It's not about politics. We want to know the truth about what happened. And then now it's for the public to see. And that's what we've always been looking for, whether it
Right.
comes to a Kyle Rittenhouse case, whether it comes to January 6th, release the footage for people to see. And the same thing happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. You release all the footage. You got Drew Hernandez that does work with Turning Point USA
Mhm.
as a host of Frontlines, and he was able to testify. And he's an investigative journalist that said, no, 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 no. Like, what the media is reporting is false. Kyle Rittenhouse was not there hunting people down, and this was not unprovoked. And when it comes to January 6th, people are now getting an understanding that we need to see all the footage. It's the same thing too. Like, I know it's a hot button, and I know this is a long-winded answer, Connor, I'm sorry,
Oh no,
is
you're fine.
when you have the Summer of Love, everything that led to the BLM riots. Look at the police footage of what led to that.
Right.
Look at Derek Chauvin and the rest of the police officers' actions. This was not just some murder that happened. It wasn't just, oh, we pulled some guy out of the car that happened to have some counterfeit bills and they decided just to murder a black man. That's not what happened. Release the footage, allow people to put two and two together. The same thing has happened with COVID. I know we just had Matt Taibbi. I hope I'm saying his last name right, but he released the Twitter files, and he was the journalist that has now gone in front of
The so-called journalist.
so-called
Yes.
journalists, and went to say that media and these politicians really don't think the public is smart enough to be able to decide for themselves what really happens with COVID. If they really want to get a shot or not, do they want to go with natural immunity? Was January 6th really what we thought it was? Did George Floyd get murdered? All these things. Did Kyle Rittenhouse just go kill men in cold blood? Release the footage. But the media and politicians and elites don't think that we're smart enough. And I think in a lot of ways, the public has been dumb enough to allow them to manipulate us and not ask for things like release the footage. We can put it together ourselves. We can say 2 + 2 = 4.
Right. Right. There's a obvious aversion to transparency coming out of Washington, which I guess is nothing new, really, for our political landscape.
Yeah, that's all we're looking for is we want transparency and accountability.
Right.
But also to like, we're going to be people more on the conservative side, but that doesn't mean that people that call themselves conservative or have an R on their chest are not corrupt themselves. We want accountability across the board. We
Yeah.
want an understanding that if someone like Fauci is going to use our taxpayer dollars to manipulate us and tear families apart, and with the January 6th committee, there's people now that just think it is the worst thing that ever happened to United States of America. And they're just puppets that are they're using talking points they find on left-wing media. But we want people to be held accountable across the board. It's not just the left.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a line of thinking that just popped in my head. I hadn't thought of this before, but what do you think that young Americans how do you think young Americans are processing the January 6th claims? Because, to them, many of the Gen Z individuals were either not alive or were very, very small when 9/11 happened. And then, of course, the other one that they've compared it to is Pearl Harbor, which is, of course, to those individuals, even much more distant, history. So, do you feel like to some degree the lack of us having a real domestic emergency is part of what allows the media to really drum up the narrative so much easier?
Well, especially too when young people are going to these indoctrination centers called universities. This
Hmm.
is not higher learning, this is higher indoctrination. They're being indoctrinated when they're in elementary school, and then they go to high school, and then they go to college, and they're hearing a revisionist history,
Hmm.
or they're just not even being told about these things at all. And when you have no recollection of what 9/11 was like because you were either too young or you weren't born yet, you look at something like this and what happens here? You put Donald Trump with anything that led to a death, because obviously there was a death of a police officer that was the way that that was reported was disgusting as
Yeah.
well. Basically, just trying to say killed at the hands of Trump supporters. You have a younger generation that is more liberal and godless than ever, and you just put Trump inside of that, and all they're going to hear is talking points from their favorite celebrities and singers and influencers on TikTok, and they're going to puppet for the left. So young people, I think in some ways they could care less about politics, but in other ways they're going to be like, yes, I am 100% against this thing that was an attack on our democracy, Also, too, there's young people that have no idea we're a constitutional republic. So even
Right.
when you come out and say things like this was an attack on democracy, you clearly don't even understand the way our government is run.
Right.
And the big thing too is young people are not watching Tucker Carlson.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
have people like us who are a little bit more middle age, and you're going to have the older generation. They're going to watch Tucker Carlson. You hope that that finds some traction on social media. You hope that people start repurposing some of that content and putting it on TikTok and meeting these young people where they're at. Um, so I think in general, young people are going to go with whatever's trendy. And at the same time, too, it's been so long that they've now been indoctrinated that they will not hear anything of the sort that will try to dismantle their already ingrained line of thinking that this was an attack on democracy. And thank God nothing worse happened. And thank God our Lord and Savior, Joe Biden, got in office and Kamala Harris, so we could see more diversity, we could see more peace, while
Right.
at the same time totally disregarding the billions of dollars in damage and the dozens of lives that were lost or unbelievably affected financially or emotionally through the BLM riots. So I think in general, young people could care less. Young people are indoctrinated, so they won't hear any different. But there's also some amazing young people on the conservative side that really want to use their platform to be like, some of them will be like, hey, look at you, I told you, like in your face kind of situation. But a lot of them are great young conservative Gen Zers that just want people to know, hey, look into this a little bit further, stop being so reactionary and so tribalistic about this. Here's the truth, and that's all you should ever want.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, I mean, what I think is really interesting is that this entire January 6th narrative has really been used to ramp up the government assault on its own citizens
Mm.
and labeling its own citizens as domestic terrorists, such as, I mean, this isn't directly tied to January 6th, but they conflate the two. The parents at school boards being labeled domestic terrorists, for example. Um, so, how do you think that law-abiding citizens should respond to this kind of slander that's being perpetrated by the federal government?
Well, there's times you see so many videos of fathers being incredibly upset. Just look at what happened with some of the Virginia school board
Yeah.
members. Look what happened. I don't remember the state, but there was a pastor that basically got thrown out of a meeting where they're allowing men in women's restrooms. There's drag queen story hours. There's drag queen events at their schools that these parents don't know about. And of course, they're coming up to these school board meetings, which some school boards are not even allowing them to speak.
Yeah.
These school board meetings know that they're just going to have to be torn apart. And this is not about accepting a lifestyle. This is dangerous for kids. You are
Right.
sexualizing kids. In what world would you ever even allow a heterosexual stripper at
Right.
a school? Why are we allowing drag queens? And then some of these kids are starting to dress up themselves. And what parents, I have no idea what it's like to be a parent. So I can't give any sort of parental advice about something I don't know about. Um, but I do know with the conversations I've had with parents, they've decided enough is enough. My kid is at risk and they're pulling them out of these public schools, but they also know there's plenty of friends and family that have their kids in these schools that just can't afford to do homeschool or send them to a private school. And then sometimes these private schools can be just as lenient. And that's where they're kind of starting to take it into their own hands to say, like, who do you think you are to sexualize my child like this, to be promoting this kind of sex ed for, I mean, there's kids as young as kindergartners that are
Yeah.
learning about sex.
Yeah.
There's kids as young as first and second grade that are learning about, anal beads and butt plugs. And if people are jumping in here, sorry if that's not allowed to be said on these lives. But these things lead to indoctrinating kids to think that sexual perversion is somehow okay. If you have a weird feeling about it, it's just because you're not experienced. That's what's happening at these events.
Yeah.
And all it is ushering in a godless, meaningless, secular religion. That's all this is. They don't want to have any sort of Bible reading story hours. Heaven
Kirk
forbid that
Cameron
ever
tried
happens.
doing that and they tried to shut it down. Luckily, he pushed back and eventually won the day. But yeah, there's a obvious hostility towards flipping the narrative.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it gets to a point where it's like this is not unloving to go in and tell people like it is. School boards, the left understood that that was something we were not watching over as conservatives, as Christians, that they were able to insert these absolutely insane perverts to come in here and allow this stuff.
Yeah.
And no wonder we're living in a generation where either there's something in the water or we're just completely insane because more kids are now identifying as bisexual, lesbian, and gay.
No, it's
Like
multifaceted.
it's like it's either there's indoctrination or there's something in the water.
It's
That's
both. It's both. I don't know if you're familiar with John Moody,
yeah.
but I was listening to a great podcast where he was talking all about just the many different chemicals in our foods and in our daily household products, and that's a whole other trail that we don't have time to explore tonight. But it's multifaceted. Unfortunately, there's a social contagion to it, as well as I think there is an outright I'm not going to say that all of it's intentional. I think some of it is ignorance, but there is probably a degree of intentional chemical warfare as well. And it's wild that we are growing up in this generation that is now seeing the effects of all this.
Yeah, and that's why Hershey's chocolate's got to be gay now. It's got to
Yeah.
be trans. It's got to every single thing is got to be something I tweeted out recently, and I know oh man, I do a good job of ruffling some feathers, but I also feel like I, I'm just kind of unleashed now. A lot of stuff that I feel like I couldn't say in my career in sports media, I'm going to say now. There's all this talk about Christian nationalism and the
Mm,
dangers of there is actual dangers of Christian nationalism, no doubt, of using the Bible out of context to try to get some sort of political power or usher in the second coming of God somehow. But just because people love America and they love their God doesn't mean that they're dangerous. But
right.
if there's all this talk about Christian nationalism, why is there no talk about LGBTQ nationalism?
Right.
LGBTQ is trying to insert themselves into every aspect of society. That's why you're seeing beauty companies elevating trans women. If you trans, just start saying fake women. If it says trans and then woman or man is following that, it just means fake the next thing you hear. So you have a
Right.
fake woman that's now telling women what femininity is like. And
Right.
that's why you have companies like Hershey's that are starting to dive into this. And this is LGBTQ nationalism. But people are
Yeah.
not going to see that as dangerous. They're going to see that as finally we're in such an accepting lifestyle. But what has that acceptance led to? That's led to the dismantling of God's bride, the church, a dismantling of the education system, almost a dismantling of the political system, and basically every single sphere you can think of, the alphabet mafia is trying to insert themselves. I don't
Yeah.
know why there's no talk about it.
They're colonizing very well. I mean, when you see the U.S. embassies, they're flying the pride flag.
Yep.
They're not flying the U.S. flag, or at best, they're flying both flags. And then I just saw a viral video that went all over the internet this last week of a guy driving his truck over. It was the transgender flag,
Yeah.
or whatever, whichever new variation of the pride flag it was that was painted in the streets, and
There's
they're
always more shapes and more colors.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Never
We're gonna
ends.
get some serious seizures next time they come up with a new variation. But yeah, no, the truck driver, he like did a burnout or something like that on it, and they're
Yep.
reviewing the security tapes, and they're saying like, we're gonna investigate this guy, make sure that if he did this intentional, that he's held to account. And it's like, you want to prosecute a guy for doing a burnout on a flag that you painted on a road, but you don't want to prosecute so many of the other violent crimes that are happening on in our inner cities. And that's a whole other can of worms. But
it's a hate crime now, though. Like, they are a protected group, and you're going to have politicians that are going to platform on this. We
yeah,
are now going to be a part of the political group, a part of a political era that is going to make every part of America more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. DEI.
yep,
We see that
absolutely.
in every aspect of society. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they find this guy, he's going to get thrown in jail.
Yeah.
But, hopefully you have some amazing law firms like Alliance Defending Freedom that defend a lot of college students. They've defended coaches just for praying at sports games and getting fired for that. You got a lot of really powerful conservative Christians, Christian conservatives out there that, really have said, we're not going to go down without a fight. But that's what's happened is they are a protected class. And then you even see with Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union, they just had a speech at the NAACP Awards talking about how they need to protect Black trans children. And they're now a part of our protected group. And like, people know that, I'm sure, that watch your show, like, there is a hierarchy of oppression.
Intersectionality. Yeah.
That's it. And then Vodi Bakum, if people aren't familiar with him, he does an incredible job breaking down intersectionality.
Yep.
Oh yeah,
There we go.
I actually just bought that book of about 17 books. I bought this last week when I was at Shepherd's Conference. But there's a hierarchy of oppression. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, if you're a woman, you're going to be on there. If you're Black or or consider yourself a person of color, you're going to be there. And then if you are Muslim, you're going to be on that as well. And then if you start combining some of those things, where I am a Black trans Muslim, it's like, now you've reached a major point where you're going to be extra protected. But on the other side, it's be like, well, if you're white, you've had everything handed to you. You have the innate sin of racism ingrained in your blood, so there's nothing you can do.
It's the original sin.
Yeah, to find forgiveness, because we always know that, like, the original sin was not disobeying God's commands. It was, I think Adam was racist to one of the animals there or something. I don't remember. That's in some Bible out there.
Oh, I'm sure. Have you ever read Age of Entitlement by Christopher Caldwell?
I haven't.
So that's a really great book. In fact, I know Charlie's referenced it about 1 billion times, so I'm surprised he hasn't required you to read that. But it's a really interesting read, because it covers America since the 60s. Specifically, it kind of picks up at 1963 with the assassination of JFK, and kind of moves through LBJ and the Great Society Act. But it does talk a lot about the idea that the civil rights movement is just constantly being replicated. And that's where we see, it started with obviously a legitimate cause of the Black Americans wanting to end segregation. And that's an actual cause that we agree with, that's a good thing. Some of what happened as a result of the legislation, that's iffy, but that's a whole other topic. But then it gets emulated and copy and paste to gay lesbian couples, and now it's turning into transgender. And to be honest, there's right behind it is some nastier and nastier things that we're already seeing creep out, which is probably going to be, I'll keep it YouTube friendly and just say adult trying to get consent from individuals who happen to be younger. Unfortunately, that's just
maps.
where it's pushing.
We could say maps.
Maps.
And then
That's right. Thank you.
Look
How bigoted of me.
Look that up. Everybody can look that up and make sure you don't get deplatformed.
Yep.